Morning, everyone. Morning, Michael. I see we're live on YouTube. Candace or Carrie, are we good to go?
Good morning, Madam Chair. We are live on YouTube and recording.
Okay, great. Excellent. I think since I know counselors are going to continue to trickle in, but since I've got to read the opening statement stuff and I've already got some questions from colleagues to read aloud, I think we'll get going. So with that, this working session of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee is now open. For the record, my name is Kenzie Bach, the District 8 City Councilor and also the chair of the Council's Ways and Means Committee. This working session is being recorded. It's being live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and FiOS Channel 964. This working session today is part of a council budget review process that's going to be happening. It's, throughout April, May, June. We've got about 35 hearings and working sessions on the books. Our hearings are the opportunities for public testimony and then to hear from the departments directly. So those happen over the course of the month ahead, and we've had a few this week already. These working sessions are designed just for counselors in order to get a bunch of questions that counselors have on the record for our departments. And the purpose of that is really to be able to send the questions over to the departments in a formal way and make sure that the hearings that we're having are, get the most questions of the council and the public answered, come with the most pertinent information. We found that was effective last year, and so we're doing it again this year. If you are watching at home and you want to testify, you can find the council schedule of the hearings at boston.gov/council-budget. That's boston.gov/council-budget. You can email ccc.wm@boston.gov with your testimony or to find out how to testify live in a Zoom, or give us a video. You can upload a video to boston.gov/budget-testify, and we'll be happy to play it at the end of a hearing. But we won't be taking public testimony today in the working session. Today's working session is on docket 0524 to 0526, orders for the FY22 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations for the school department and for other post-employment benefits. Dockets 0527 to 0528, orders for capital fund transfer appropriations. Docket 0529 to 0531, orders for the capital budget, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. And docket 0535 to 0536 and 0538 to 0539, which are orders authorizing limits for the Boston Police Department and Environment Department revolving funds for FY22. So to put that into real terms, our focus today is generating questions to send in advance to the departments that we're speaking with on May 10th, which are the Police Department and then the Environment Department, and within the Environment Department, the Conservation Commission and the Landmarks Commission. And then both of those entities, the Environment Department and the Police Department, have revolving funds, which the council also needs to authorize limits for. So those will be our May 10th hearings. That's a week from Monday. And in advance, we're sending over the questions that we're generating today. So with that, we will jump straight to colleagues. I'm joined here today by my colleagues, Councillor Michael Flaherty at large, Councillor Liz Braden, District 9, and Councillor Matt O'Malley, District 6, and I see also Councillor Julia Mejia at large. So the way this will work is I think we'll do 2 rounds. So we'll start on police and then go to environment and landmarks for colleagues. So I'll just take your police questions first. And I'll give preference to all the colleagues who are here in person. So we'll run through your questions so that you can go as you need to. And then I've got some questions that have been submitted by other counselors who aren't able to make the working session, and I will read those into the record so that we can get them over to the administration. So starting with Councillor Flaherty. Councillor Flaherty, if you have questions you want to put on the record for the police department, that would be awesome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you come back to me in a few minutes? I'm just in the middle of something.
Sure, absolutely. Councillor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm hopeful that the monies that Mayor Gini has identified for additional medical staff to try out the officers who are on long-term sick leave will help identify folks who maybe maybe retirement is the best option. I just feel, I just wonder how has the BPD going to utilize? How are they going to utilize those funds and in a timely way to expedite the process? That's one question, and also. In terms of, that's it for now. And that's the only one I have at the moment.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Councillor O'Malley, do you have anything yet on the police?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you again for convening these. So to follow that line of questioning, obviously, I think a large topic that I know you and I would venture guess all colleagues are concerned about is the overtime budget, what was spent, what the overage was, and what strategies we have going forward next year, recognizing the fact that we've already seen, which is common when the weather gets nicer, an uptick in violent crime. Similarly, along the lines of Councillor Braden's questioning, as we talk about the best team and other resources and reimagining police and how response to calls are made, really am curious about the Boston EMS, EMTs, and paramedics. I know there will be a separate hearing on that with public health, but I think this is also relevant in public safety. And then finally, I'm curious, and I recognize the fact that there can't be too much level of detail or specificity that's gone into, but curious in terms of the contract negotiations, where we are, what that looks like, as we have many, many bargaining units currently without a contract. I know that's a large part of the administration's focus, so looking where we are on that as it relates to BPD. Thank you. That's all for now, Madam Chair.
Great. Thanks so much, Councillor O'Malley. And we've also been joined by Councillor Andrea Campbell. Councillor Mejia, questions for the police department?
Yes, good morning. I only have like 20. No, I'm just joking. So just really quick, we are just curious about, since our time in office, we've learned that 2 police officers, Dennis White and Patrick Rose, who were kept on the police force despite being accused of domestic violence, and the other charged with child molestation. And I think obvious questions on everybody's mind is what else? I would like the BPD to come prepared to tell us how they're planning on auditing their entire police force to root out anybody with similar charges. I'm also curious, can we get a total dollar amount of how much funding is specifically going to BRIC? How much of it is going towards the verses of just general intelligence and analysis funding? How many full-time employees will be employed to operate the BRIC? The same goes for Youth Violence Task Force, the gang unit, gang cars, traffic, parking enforcement, equipment, weapons, and school police. Would just like to have a real good sense of all of those numbers. The BPD data found that 62% of FIO stops involved Black people. I'd like to know what percentage of those stops were stop and frisk versus their white counterparts, and can they explain why 10% of stop and frisk data is marked as quote unquote missing? Boston saw a rise in homicide rates in 2020, and Boston has the largest gap in unsolved homicides between white and Black victims. What is being done to actually address this? I'd like to know how many officers currently sit on federal task force and what those task force are. And the police commissioner is required by the Trust Act to submit a report detailing their role in relations to ICE. Has this report been compiled, and when we'll be able to see it? I do have questions for part 2. I don't know if you want them now, but so I'll just two more questions. Part of the budget discussions last year was an understanding that the BPD would commit to being more engaged with the council. Since then, they have routinely ignored requests to appear in person to testify and have denied requests for information. I'd like for them to come with an explanation for why they have ignored these accountability measures and what they're going to do to make someone available to the council when needed. And last year, the BPD went $17 million over budget, more than $12 million that was originally cut from the OT budget. My question is, why does the city not just not more accurately project the need for overtime instead of misleading people into thinking police spending will go down? And with the city, when the city has to pay for extra BPD overtime, where does that money actually come from? What percentage come from free cash versus the department efficiencies? Has the Boston Police Department provided any answers around what is the minimum staffing calculations are in neighborhoods and qualifying police presence in different neighborhoods? Why would the community and city council support adding police when there hasn't been data or discussion of how to decrease existing over-policing? And last year, I asked about what officers speak which languages and where they are staffed. I don't believe I got an answer to that. So I'm once again going to ask that they come prepared with that data.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Mejia. Next up is, and we will be coming back for those questions on environment and landmarks. Councilor Campbell. We're doing, Councilor Campbell, we're doing police first, and then we'll do a second round on environment and landmarks.
Okay, well, I won't be duplicative because everything everyone else said, frankly, is on my list. So I'll just echo those questions, and particularly some of the level of detail from Council Mejia just now. I will say I have a question around the Bureau of Community Engagement. I think there was a reduction there for that department. Want some updates on where the department is with respect to the task force recommendations, implementation, et cetera. In addition, updates on diversity, efforts to diversify the department. There's been some suggestions out there for a long time. Nothing's really happened. Implicit bias, training, more details on that, the costs, et cetera. I think some of my other questions were already sort of asked. I think that's it. And the last is more questions on any conversations within the department on restructuring or shifting the structure of the department so districts have more coverage, because I do not accept this notion that we have to give them a lot more money in order for these neighborhoods get the coverage they need. When you look at the number of officers we currently have available to us, how are we restructuring the department to send, whether it's the bike unit or others, how are we giving consideration to these other units in terms of redeploying them to other departments? That is a major narrative that is out there in the community that I think is very troubling to residents and constituents, with no actual thoughtful conversation with the department. We've asked several times, of course, in the context of overtime, as to why they have not considered doing this to give more coverage to each of the neighborhoods. What are the restrictions? What are the barriers to doing that? Thank you, Councilor Bach. And thank you to my council colleagues as well.
Thank you so much, Councilor Campbell. Councilor Flaherty, did you have anything you wanted to add at this point about police?
Madam Chair, I'll go after your questions if you don't mind.
Sure. Okay, so, well, I was going to mainly save mine for the end of this, just because I know people have places to be. So I think what we'll do is I'll just say, I mean, the number one for me is like there's a theory of saving considerable overtime this year, and there was also that theory last year. I do think something's shifted, which is that in the course of our oversight hearings, I think we've honed in somewhat on the fact that the number of officers that are out and the replacement costs are definitely the number one driver in a really big way. And so in that sense, I think to Councilor Braden's point, like the direction of, let's solve that, with medical triage seems like maybe promising. But what I'm interested in is kind of like, what's our actual projection? Like we've got cadets that the administration's proposing to have come onto the schedule at a certain point. And then you've got a medical triage team, which you have to have some theory about how many officers they can process like in a month, right? Like how many folks do you get back to work or do you get into retirement? And that should, like, you can actually run a formula of that. Like there's a certain number of overtime hours that the administration is proposing to save. And so there's therefore a monthly rate that you have to hit. And you have to have a theory where the combination of the cadets and the rate of medical triage is going to result in that amount of overtime savings. Or if it doesn't, you have to have another theory for how it's going to happen. So I think that's really where I've come out of all these oversight hearings is like the council needs to be demanding a clear mechanism and a strategy that we're going to be able to track very closely, and that we know the administration is going to be able to track on its own end. So that's the number one thing. I have a bunch more questions, but I think that what I'll do is save reading them to the end just to save everybody's time. So Councillor Braden, you had your hand up.
I think to your point, I feel that, in one of our hearings, one of your oversight hearings, and someone from the police department said, oh, well, when you get into trying to process someone into retirement, then you get into legal challenges and foot dragging. And I really feel that we need to look at, a set protocol that would trigger immediate triage and appropriate processing of an officer. If they're unable to perform the duties, then they need to, or if they can't be reallocated to a different job within the department, then there needs to be a, and I'm not sure if there already is a set protocol for how this is handled, but we can't have this situation drag on for year on year on year. While we're just accumulating this massive amount of replacement costs. So, and the other issue really with regard to diversity is I'm really hopeful, maybe naively so, that our cadets coming in, that we will be recruiting women and people of color at a significant level to help redress the discrepancies in terms of language skills and cultural competency. And the other question I had was with regard to, it just went in my head and out again. No, it's gone. Never mind. Those are the two main ones. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Braden. And I should say, I guess I'll put them on the record. I have a set of questions about the alternative response model. And I know that the team is working on that, and that it's also technically in the OHHS. More than technically, right? Like, part of the point is that the alternative response pilot would not be run out of the police department. It would be run out of Health and Human Services. So I think that these questions are probably more for them and their hearing. But I think my team, we've been doing a lot of research on what alternative response models look like in other places and kind of the brass tacks of like how it gets set up. And so sort of curious about what we're thinking in terms of the response team there. What are the credentials for the crisis workers? Like, how many people employed under the pilot? What are the hours of service? Like, a big thing that maybe is a police question, or at least it's going to have to be done in conjunction with the police, is sort of how dispatch is going to be trained to triage calls to the new service for the pilot, because critically, if people call 911 and we're like, the dispatch sits inside the police department right now, and then that needs to be able to send calls in this other way. And I was sort of curious about whether I realized I think that we take all dispatch calls in-house, but I don't know if we have contracts on that front or not. So just a question about that. And we've mainly heard about mental health crises. Is there any other type of calls that the alternative response program would be thinking about responding to and triaging? Would it be focused in certain neighborhoods or piloted across all of Boston? How are they involving community stakeholders? What's the target start gate? And are the best clinicians, it seems to me from reading the materials, like the idea is to continue to use BEST as a set of folks who are co-responding with the police, and then have this pilot be trying something that isn't co-response, that's an alternative response, but just understanding clearly the interaction there. So I guess my questions, those are, and Shane, by the way, I have my questions all typed up, so don't feel like you have to take notes on mine. But, trying to figure out what the police department's involvement in making a pilot along those lines possible is, and what they're doing on that front would be the question that I want for the department. I'm fine with some of the details going to HHS, but if they're the ones managing it, but I don't want a situation where we've missed the chance to get the police department to sort of commit to the pieces that they would need to make a pilot like that a success. So that's on my mind. And then I want an update just sort of overall in how they're thinking about where we are on all the Boston Police Reform Task Force pieces, and just like what the internal understanding is about timeline on getting all of those things implemented. Obviously, we know we've got OPAT standing up and lots of things, and I think implementing things takes time. It just would be good to understand what that schedule is. So I've got a few more, but like I said, I think I'm going to hold the rest of mine just to the end so that I'm not holding colleagues. Councillor Flaherty, I see your hand is up.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Obviously, I can send these to Shane as well because they're written, but real briefly, just what investments are being made to expand the Best Clinicians program? What investments are being made to increase recruitment efforts within our cadet program? And how are we working with the department, whether it's really you had just touched on it, the medical triage piece and other strategies to manage our officers out on medical leave, and whether or not the department would consider working with the council and the city to get chiropractic services added to the formulary, which I think will be helpful. And then a per sort of event cost, we had no parades this year. We had no marathon. Some of the larger events were canceled. So I'd love to sort of see what the cost savings was on that. And then obviously coupled with the protests in some instances that downgraded into riots, et cetera. So I just want to get a sense of sort of what the per event costs were so we can have some predictability moving forward when obviously our parades are back in full scale, and then what other efforts are needed to keep our city and residents safe. So that's it in a nutshell.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Flaherty. And that reminded me as well, I do think it would be good because cadets are such a focus of the administration's proposal, I think that it would be good for the council to get a bit of a briefing on kind of like how the cadets are trained, like what's the focus, like what types of training are they receiving, what's the percentage of time being spent on that, in terms of, like anti-bias stuff, but and de-escalation, like all the things that the tools that we talk about equipping our officers with. Obviously, here you're talking about putting new people on the force. So I think really understanding how that program is rigorously designed would be helpful to the council, especially as it's being proposed as sort of as a solution here, which I know people have different views on. Does anybody else who's here have anything that you want to add about police before we jump over to environment landmarks? And then I will say I have questions on police from both councillors Wu and Arroyo, which I will read into the record along with the balance of my questions. But I do think I want to, in these working sessions, give precedence to the folks who have showed up in the Zoom room. So anybody else who's here have something? Yes, Councillor Braden.
I remembered what I was going to ask. It's in relation to the crime lab, and I don't know, does that live, is it a separate budget piece, or is it, I'm looking for it in here and I can't find it. So I just had a question about their resources. Are they up to speed with the technology to help, help with cold cases and DNA analysis, and especially in relation to untested rape kits? Just to make sure that we're not letting that slide. Thank you.
Great. And I know that Councillor Asabi George also put some questions on the record yesterday about the crime lab and sort of capacity there, that some of which we said we would forward to the police conversation. So I think that's good. Okay. All right. Well, seeing no other hands, let's jump over to environment. So that's Environment, Conservation Commission, landmarks within it. Parks has its own hearing, so it's not Parks. Councillor Braden, I'll bop back to you if you have any of those ready.
Let's see. Environment. Environment and landmarks. Landmarks, I really feel that we've had this discussion before about their capacity to deal with the backlog of studies on nominations for landmark status. So I feel that, they actually need to increase their staff rather than try to contract all those studies out. somewhat. Environment, I'd like an update on the tree planting, the urban forestry project, how we're at that. And also in terms of, and this is maybe more of a water and sewer issue, in terms of green infrastructure, in terms of bioswales and rain gardens, etc. Is that part of their portfolio, or are they leaving that entirely to Boston Water and Sewer to deal with those issues? I have a concern about hardscape paving over a lot of our neighbourhoods. People creating parking spaces with asphalt and increasing our runoff, because I think that's going to be problematic in the event of extreme weather events. That will have a lot more flooding if we don't insist on more permeable surfaces and losing all those. And then I'd like an update on the green building codes. Where are we at with that? Have we updated those? And also in terms of, that's probably a good start, and I'll come back with more. Thank you.
Okay, great. Awesome. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And first off, Shane Pack, I apologize. I'm not nearly as conscientious as Councillors Bach or Flaherty. I have not typed up my questions, and I have quite a few for this cabinet. Beginning with Conservation Commission, I'm curious in terms of acquisition on city land for the purpose of both green space, open space, and affordable housing. Is actually a project that's happening in Rosendale that I've been working on for many, many years. We'll have a hearing on Monday on that, so this hearing will follow that. Looking for, and I obviously support it unconditionally, looking forward to more examples of that. Similarly, looking for an update from the Conservation Commission on the wetlands ordinance. We're still sort of in the year-long or this half a year-long period of writing and fine-tuning the promulgations, and want to see where we are there as it relates to the Environment Department. And apologize, my little assistant is with me right here. You may be able to hear her in the background as well. In terms of the Environment Department, looking at an update on community choice energy or community choice aggregation adoption. It went into effect in February. I want to know how many residents have opted up for 100% renewable, how many have opted down, and how many are in the default category, and what that means for some revenue that was generated for the city to build out some of our renewable infrastructure. It's still early, but as someone who has opted up to 100%, it is a negligible impact on my bill. And if you just stayed at the default, you are paying less than you did a year ago. So it's a terrific success that we should all take great pride in. Looking briefly, just for a quick update on the plastic bag reduction ordinance, we of course paused it from April of last year until October of this year, but it is now in effect. We want to make sure that the compliance is working out well. Next, looking for an update, and this is somewhat that will come under public facilities as well. Of course, adherence and plans for our net zero carbon construction as it relates to municipal buildings, which we passed, and then looking for larger scale commercial buildings. During last year's budget process, I had a commitment from the administration that we'd be looking at buildings that are 20,000 square feet or higher for the or larger for the next iteration, which is great. Looking forward to seeing how we're doing that to codify that in some of our building guidelines. And then finally, wanting to really get a better understanding, and I'll be doing some work separate on this in my role as a counselor, looking at BERDO, the Boston Energy Reporting and Disclosure Ordinance, something I was very, very proud to have worked on with former Mayor Menino back in 2012 and 2013, seeing where we are in terms of obviously measuring and managing the information, but also sharing the information, looking at ways that we could better publicize the information and really adhere to it. As we know, buildings account for nearly 70% of our greenhouse gas emissions. This is the most impactful way if we indeed are going to reach our ambitious climate goals. And by God, I hope and pray that we will, and know that everyone agrees that we should. This is going to be an absolute game changer. So that is it. I certainly have some parks questions. This is one that I will ask in this working session. I will also ask in the DPW working session, and that's relating to our trash and recycling pickup. Every year, the cost increases. It really is. And I've said this at virtually every budget hearing for the last decade. When I was a freshman counselor, we were generating a $5 per ton tipping fee for our recycling. And we are now paying $86 per ton for the recycling. We've seen a $90 drop. We are lucky. We're a municipality that actually still pays less for recycling pickup than we do for traditional trash pickup in landfills. Many cities and municipalities, that's flipped, which means you have many cities and municipalities that are just burying their recycling. A good strategy to address this and actually begin to make the commodity profitable again is to move away from single stream recycling. And that's why we've been pushing for composting, textile recycling. We've seen sort of modest incremental achievement there. I want to see how and when we'll be able to have that piloted curbside composting program, what it means. And then again, I think that as we talk about federal funding and as we talk about some of the stimulus that's coming our way, we need to have a conversation about actually building our own recycling facility that could serve the region and generate significant revenue for the city of Boston. So thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Shane, and Michelle for keeping up with all those questions.
Great. Oh, thank you. That's what playback's for, and we're doing them this way too, so that folks like you with your expertise as the chair of environment can come and do exactly that. So thank you. All right. Next up, Councilor Mejia, Environment Landmarks.
Yes. Put my glasses on. So for the Environment Department, I'm basically I'm concerned about the impact that climate change has on our small businesses in particular. I'm curious to know what kinds of work the city is doing to help support small businesses address the impacts of climate change and whether or not they're working on any quote unquote green business initiatives. I know that on Columbia Road and in Dorchester and different parts of the city of Boston, some of these businesses are being impacted by the flooding. So I just want to make sure that that we're looping them into this work. And then there was a report in 2019 revealed that Boston's Chinatown had the worst air quality in the state of Massachusetts. Since that report went public, I'm curious if they can summarize the efforts that the city has made to mitigate this particular public health emergency. And further, what steps is the department taking to proactively improve air quality in both Chinatown and the city as a whole? And when can residents expect material improvement in said air quality? I know that going back to the businesses in Jersey City implemented a green business initiative too, and it's working well. So I just want to get some feedback on that. And then, in terms of environment, I think there is an opportunity to look at violence and then the intersection of these heating patterns that happen. We always see an uptick in violence in the summer. I know the weather's hotter, more people are out in these streets. But, if people don't have places where they can, cooling spaces, then I think that there's a direct correlation there. So I'm just curious if the Environment Department is looking at any of those impacts of violence, in particular neighborhoods where we see an uptick every year. So I'm sure that there's a direct correlation there. And then I'm just curious about the Melina Cast 2.0 plan, street trees, just curious about if they can give us any updates on those things. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor Bach. I won't be duplicative because many of my questions were asked already by my council colleagues. So one is, what's the city's approach to conserving privately owned land or urban wilds that are crucial to climate resiliency? This has come up quite a bit from residents with respect to the Stella Road parcel, Crane Ledge. How are sites researched, valued, approached? Is there an equity lens that is used? Tree canopy obviously is coming up quite a bit with respect to development. What is the city doing to expand the tree canopy in certain neighborhoods? But also, what is our process overall as how do we ensure that we are maintaining and expanding our tree canopy with respect to new development projects or renovations? Clearly, it's coming up in quite a few areas, Charlestown, Roxbury, but I think it's an issue overall in the city. Landmarks Commission, expand their capacity. I think it goes to Councilor Braden's point in terms of the backlog. But what's also been coming up is they want to play, I think, a greater role in development proactively at the beginning with respect to projects that are buildings that are being demoed. Landmarks Commission has incredible expertise. How do we make sure that they are actually involved in that process at the outset, not at the end, when residents are sort of struggling to try to save a building or a space that they deem to be a landmark or historic, even if it hasn't been designated? What do we currently have in place to oversee waterfront and river sustainability and access projects? How will the new investments in the Climate Ready Boston be directed? The new heat resilience study, will that be citywide? And I actually, on the composting, Councilor O'Malley asked that question. And yeah, I think my other ones have been asked for now. Thank you. And thank you to Central staff.
Great.
Alexander says hello. Yes.
Great to hear. It's great to hear from so many babies of the
You
city.
want to say hi? He says, Mama. Thanks, Councilor Bach.
Thanks, Councilor Campbell. Councilor Flaherty, questions for environment landmarks?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to touch obviously quickly on landmarks. We've had some hearings recently, and time has come to give landmarks the resources they need to sort of be on the front end of that equation, as opposed to sort of scrambling around at the 11th hour, playing catch up. A lot of our communities, our residents, reach out to landmarks at the earliest stage, sort of when they sort of sniff out that something's cooking on their street or across the street from their home or around the corner from their house. And to a large extent, landmarks is kind of, their hands are sort of tied early. And then by the time they sort of get in the game, it's catch up. In some instances, it's almost too late. So time has come to sort of understand and respect the work that landmarks does, give them the resources they need so they can protect those very precious historical places, buildings, artifacts that are here in our city. And so I want to strongly emphasize that I would love to see more by way of landmarks getting their fair share. And also, obviously, it's tough to follow Councilor O'Malley. He's been a leader on this body in the environmental space. We're blessed to have him. So maybe when he's gone, I'm going to slide into that space. It seemed to work good for Ed Markey. So maybe I can continue the great work that Councilor O'Malley has done on the council. But I will say that he did not mention trees, but maybe he's holding his powder for the Parks Department. But it's time, again, long overdue, whether it's the Parks Department, our Environmental Department, or Public Works. They need a bona fide tree pruning division, our own, with up-to-date technology and equipment to allow them to carry out the function of tree pruning. We sub it out, we farm it out, and good luck getting on the list to get a tree prune. So again, time has come. There's a lot of focus on the planting of trees, which I wholeheartedly support. We need to continue to do that. I know that several colleagues have just mentioned sort of the canopy effect, which many of the communities I represent as a citywide city councilor have been asking for. But again, time has come. No reason, there is zero reason why the city of Boston should not have its own tree pruning division as part of parks or as part of public works. This getting on a list and waiting and then having to sub it out, and maybe you make the list, maybe you don't, while a tree is protruding into the side of your home, or it's creating a public safety hazard, or it's uprooting and damaging your or someone else's property. So time has come to put a little more emphasis on that. We do have some arborists, probably not enough. I know they do great work. I know they're taxed and stretched at all ends, but I would be happy as a clam to see the city of Boston invest and have its own tree pruning division. So I think that's it in a nutshell, Madam Chair.
Great, fantastic. Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. And I see Councilor Braden's hand is up. Councilor Braden, you want to add something?
My creative juices get going when I listen to all my colleagues talk about environmental issues. In some conversations we've had with the Environment Department, we asked about cemeteries and whether or not the City of Boston had a plan to do more green, sustainable burials and what we do with our beloved when they pass over. So I was wondering if they would explore the possibility of a pilot, some sort of a study or a pilot study into looking at green burial options in the city of Boston. They did say that given COVID, with the increased death rate, that our cemeteries they have enough capacity to bury people in the city for a limited length of time, and we have to come up with some other alternatives. So I think it might be a timely opportunity to look at that. And that was it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Braden. I see Councillor Flaherty's hands up as well.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I was sort of hot on the tree pruning division. I specifically need to know how much we spend contracting out tree pruning and tree trimming and tree planting services. Again, all functions that should be part and parcel of our either Parks Department or Public Works Department. So I'd be curious to see what that number is. And then also in addition, I know that there's been a number of exciting programs. I saw obviously that the Environmental Department's operating budget is set to increase by $1.2 million this year. And $1 million of that is to work with organizations across the city to develop job training programs, particularly in renewable energy and green infrastructure industries, which obviously, again, is music to my ears, and I'm sure all of our colleagues. So I just want a little bit more meat on the bone there. What job training programs are they talking about developing in those spaces? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Yes. Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. And that's a big focus of my questions. I think there's an opportunity for that green jobs thing to be kind of in the direction of what we've been discussing in our Conservation Corps hearings. And I think, the time is now. It's a good thing to see them included, but it's definitely included right now in the budget in a more conceptual description. So we're going to want to dig in on that.
One other item, Madam Chair, is just really to back you up into it, is obviously in the groundwater trust. You nailed it yesterday when we had the law department. Again, time has come to give those folks, particularly on the legal side of the house. It's very complicated stuff, as you know. Your district in particular sort of encompasses, I don't even know what the percentage is. It's probably 85-90% share of sort of the groundwater, ground 100% in terms of some type of additional resources in terms of being able to sort of fight the challenges, if you will, with respect to the legal side of the house. And I just want to mention it. I guess it falls under sort of environment. Could fall under landmarks if you have a precious building that is in the verge of collapse because of a groundwater issue. But nonetheless, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And please add my name to it.
Thank you, Michael. You just cut off at the end there, but yeah, I definitely will look for your help on that. I think it's not fair for us to have volunteer trustees who are really taking care of a public trust like that, and then not have the city prepared to defend them as it does the other boards. So yeah, I think that's something we'll pursue further for sure. Councillor Mejia.
Yes, so I just wanted to add a few more questions, if that's okay.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm curious if the department is looking at ways that we can also support Madison Park in terms of green building, and what opportunities exist to educate and engage and support youth internships around green building. Also curious about what else can we be doing to better educate the community around environmental issues in multiple languages. Like I think we talked about this at some hearing. I can't remember, but it was about composting. And and a lot of people who come to this country from other spaces, composting is a way of life. But we come here and we don't see it like that here. So what opportunities exist to kind of really help educate the public about all the steps that they can be taken and be more be more intentional about those PSA campaigns. I think that everybody should be more engaged in this process. And then on the public housing front, which I know you are a fierce advocate of, I'm just curious about how some of our housing developments what if any upgrades are we thinking about in terms of sustainability and helping to support the refreshers of these buildings so that they can be more environmentally friendly? I don't know if that's probably already been discussed somewhere. I'm sorry if I don't know about it, but I'd be curious about what an environmental green building looks like. Very similar to Build BPS. I'm curious if there is any initiatives or talks about rebuilding BHA with a green lens. And if that is a vision, I'd like to know what the dollar amount would look like for that. And Council Block, I'm sure you probably are the lead sponsor of such thing or already have answers to it. And if you don't think it's an appropriate conversation to have in this working session, then don't include it in the thing. I was just curious.
No, I mean, I think that it's a coming together of a bunch of conversations we're having, right? Like, I think it's appropriate to talk to environment about it's like PFD does the capital projects, but this overall strategy of, is 10% of green stuff enough? And then I think we've been adding public housing into the capital conversation over the last few years. And now, we have to kind of unite it with the green capital conversation and say, what are we doing? I do think that the housing authority does try when it's building new stuff now to make it pretty green because everybody knows the direction of travel. But I think your question about what's the overall price tag? The overall price tag is very high, and we won't get it done without substantial federal money. But for once, there's actually an infrastructure bill that's on the deck in the House that actually could send the kinds of lot of money, $1 billion kind of stuff to us that would make a dent there. So I think it's worth talking about. Environment may not know the answer to that question, but we can always send it over to BHA. So
thank you.
Councillor O'Malley, and then Councillor Braden, just let me know if your hand I wasn't sure if it was up from before or if it's new. Okay, great. I see. Councillor O'Malley.
I just wanted to follow up on Councilor Mejia's question because I think it's an excellent one, and it's something that really led our work for the last 5 years on net zero carbon construction. And just so you know, because of the work of our council and signed as an executive order by Mayor Walsh back in 2018, I believe, perhaps 2019, I may be misremembering, but all new municipal buildings will be net zero carbon construction. So that's what we aspire to for buildings. It means they will generate on-site or with offsets as much energy as they use. And that includes all new municipal buildings, including affordable housing. And what's really attractive here is that the price differential between building something that's net zero carbon and not is really de minimis, as there are different incentives for it, as just the raw costs of something like PV panels goes down dramatically. And the savings on utilities can be actualized within months. You've got some other states, or really Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania has been a pioneer in the United States of building all their affordable housing developments as net zero carbon. And you're seeing better, cleaner buildings that actually save money for the residents because, again, the utility cost is so much different. So that's going to be all for new buildings. Addition that extends to schools. That's going to extend to police stations, libraries, etc. There will have to be a time where we talk about retrofits, and there obviously would be a cost there. But again, it has to be done, and that's something that we are absolutely focused on. So it's been a real passion of mine. I will freely admit, when we first started talking about it, not many people knew what the term net zero carbon meant, me among them. But you're really seeing cities lead in this space, and I've been glad that we've been able to push Boston. So it's going to continue, and I know looking at the people on this call, they will make sure it continues when I am no longer a councillor next year. So thank you for raising that issue. It's absolutely pertinent, and there's some really good work happening in this space.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor O'Malley. Great. Unless councillors who are on right now have any further questions right now, what I'm going to do is go read Councillor Arroyo and Councillor Wu's questions into the record. And so you're welcome to stay on and listen to them. And if you have another thought after that, and I'll also read some of mine, feel free, but also counselors who are here should feel free to go as well. So from counselor, one second, let me pull these up. All right, so I'm gonna go back to, I'll do BPD. Well, no, I'll just do them by counselor. So, and Shane, all these ones I'm gonna read, we haven't written. I think you already have the copies, but just so obviously we've got that. So for the police department, from Counselor Michelle Wu, who's our city councilor at large, one question is, external violence against women funds are increasing by 95%. What will that be used for? Second question, capacity of the Community Engagement Bureau's programming was expanded in FY21 as part of the HHS Cabinet's citywide targeted violence prevention strategy. But for FY22, the proposed budget decreases by 34.1%. What community engagement functions are decreasing in size? Number 3, the budget includes a $500,000 investment in the medical unit for triage and additional clinicians to get injured officers back to work quickly. Is this for an in-house medical unit or for contracted medical staff? Number 4 is, how are minimum staffing levels determined? What formula is used to calculate them? Number 5, over the course of FY21, how many medical incidents resulted in hospitalizations? What's the breakdown of type of medical incident? What is the geographic distribution of medical incidents? What is the range in size of police response and average size of police response? Is there a way to know from the data collected if any of these incidents actually were criminal in nature versus something that could have been supported through non-police mediation? Is there a record of actions associated with each incident record that is not part of the public data sets, which just has size, nature of police response, arrests, use of force, and disciplinary action? There are some incomplete metadata fields, including latitude and longitude, in the public data sets. Is there a specific reason for this omission? Number 6, what resources within the HR department or elsewhere are dedicated to analyzing overtime data within the police department? 7, how many sworn personnel work on the detail desk? What are we cumulatively spending on their personnel costs? Number 8, how many sworn personnel work on the time and attendance desk? What are we cumulatively spending on their personnel costs? Number 9 is, what protocols are in place to communicate with ADAs or the DA's office to notify officers when judges are absent? I take that that's so that we don't do unnecessary court overtime. Number 10, what are the racial demographics of officers earning pay premiums through the Quinn bill? What's the distribution of department assignments of these officers, i.e. are any officers earning premiums assigned to the time and attendance desks? Question number 11, according to the managing partners report commissioned by Commissioner Evans, how many officers do solely administrative work or only do police work during overtime? And 12, how many involuntary accidental disability retirement orders has the commissioner or acting commissioner filed over the last fiscal year? So those are Councillor Wu's questions for the police department. On the environment side, she asks, the operating budget is set to increase by 1.2 million, including $1 million initiative to work with organizations in the city to develop job training programs in the renewable energy and green infrastructure industries. What staff will be dedicated to managing this program? What funding, if any, will be provided through collaboration with city departments like OWD? Number 2, the budget includes an annual authorization of $50,000 for the Conservation Commission to secure outside consultants to aid in the review of proposed projects. What outside consultants were contracted to review the proposed Eversource substation in East Boston, and what were their findings? So those are the questions from Councillor Wu. From Councillor Arroyo, questions for the police department. Number 1, what are BPD's minimum staffing levels and how does BPD determine whether they need more officers? How often is this reevaluated? Number 2, how many officers are assigned to district stations and how many are members of citywide units? Number 3, how many officers at BPD patrol or respond to calls? Number 4, what effort has BPD made to civilianize administrative functions and roles? Number 5, what portion of BPD officers are vaccinated? Will the department require officers to be vaccinated to continue working? Number 6, out of approximately 149 contracts, BPD only procures 3 small locally owned businesses, SLBEs, and no MBE/WPEs. What efforts are being made by BPD to be more intentional about procuring from SLBE, MWBE, and WVEs? And then Councillor Ricardo Arroyo's questions for the Environment Department are, One, there seem to be quite a few external funding sources that have been discontinued in FY22. Can the department explain why many of these grants have been discontinued in FY22? Number two, for FY22, there is an external funds allocation for the MVP heat resilience study. Can you talk a bit more about that? How long will the study last? How is it conducted? And when can we expect to see the results? Number three, why are there no planned expenditures for the climate resilience reserve for FY22? Number four, how is the department working to make sure their employees are reflective of the city of Boston? How is the department working to diversify its workforce? Number five, can the department talk a little about the impact that the pandemic has had on the environment in Boston? And number six, out of 17 contracts, none are SLB, MBE, or WBEs. How does the department plan to diversify its contracts? And then there are some additional questions. Councillor Campbell had to go, but she did submit some further questions for BPD. And they're fairly extensive, so take a deep breath. One, what are the budget expenses for Boston Police that are not reflected in the Boston Police Department section of the operating budget? How much is spent on pensions, health insurance, benefits, payroll taxes, and costs, fringe, et cetera? Two, what percentage of city appropriations, not including the Boston Public Health Commission and Boston Public Schools, is the police department? Number three, given the overall cost of the police department, including pensions, health insurance, benefits, payroll, taxes, and costs, fringe, et cetera, what is the average cost per officer? Number four, how much is spent on areas such as BRIC, the Youth Violence Strike Force Gang Unit, gang cars, traffic and parking enforcement, equipment and weapons, and school police? I think someone else asked that version of that question. How much in supplemental funding for police has been passed since June 2026? Are donations to the police department from nonprofit organizations, including but not limited to the Boston Police Foundation, Boston Police Relief Association, and Friends of the Boston Police, accounted for in this budget? Are they permitted to accept cash and in-kind donations? Seven, if two classes totaling 60 police officers plus an additional 20 cadets are added, when will they start getting paid, and when will the 60 police officers officially join the department? What are the short-term costs to the academy training, and what is the future cost per year of paying 60 officers and 20 cadets in the future? Eight, if these 80 police and cadets were not added, how much would be available for alternative investments each year in future years? Number nine, if there are 60 new officers, when they go on vacation or use their sick time, do their shifts get posted as available overtime shifts? Number 10, if there was a hiring freeze or reduction in the number of officers, what could that money be used for that would address root issues of ensuring safety, preventing harm, and transforming harm? What cuts, okay, so 11, what cuts beyond just cutting overtime would reduce disproportionate police presence, arrests, and incarceration for Black, Indigenous, and people of color residents? What could that money be used for that would address root issues of ensuring safety, preventing harm, and transforming harm? What has been the progress on creating civilian details with good paying public jobs to replace police details? Has the BPD provided, well, this is a question for BPD, again, could the department provide answers around what its minimum staffing calculations are in neighborhoods and quantify police presence in the different neighborhoods? I think there is a lot of frustration with the idea that that the council be asked to support adding police in order to keep us up to an appropriate number when there hasn't been data or discussion about what those overall spreads are, and an ability to talk about decreasing existing over-policing. 14, how much could be saved by reducing sending police to 911 calls for mental health crises? So I do think that relates to, I do think there's a police department side of the HHS pilot that we want to ask about on the 10th. Then 15, because the contracts with police have expired, how much retroactive funding for this fiscal year and next fiscal year is there expected to be? So I think this is a question about the way, about the, so I'll just explain this. We don't need to add this for the department, but right now we budget as though all of our contracts just continue because that's what's happening. Then the administration has centrally budgeted $10 million, which is there as a collective bargaining reserve to make sure that we'll have money to meet our commitments as we negotiate new contracts with the unions. But that's being held over on the side, and so it's not like it reverts back to some other use. nor is it specifically budgeted by department how much the union contracts will eventually cost. And similarly, there's a question about how much the contracts would cost if they had pay raises in them in future years, but that's an unknowable fact. The proposed, but there is a question about does the administration have an understanding of what proportion of the 10 million in the reserves for collective bargaining would go to police. I don't think that they would have that, but we can ask them if they do. How much of the American Rescue Plan funds are being planned for police? How much of past federal relief funds were used for police? 19, what capital projects are being funded by police and where could those funds go instead? 20, has the Boston Police Department, can the department provide answers again about the mechanics of how overtime's approved? And what the sort of, again, those concrete convincing plans for cutting overtime are. And then with the 40-50% of overtime hours that are for extended tour and additional tour hours, do police captains have the power to allot overtime hours in order to extend shifts and add shifts? And what other police officials have this power? If so, would enforcing stricter limits be more effective at decreasing overtime than hiring more officers? And 30 to 40% of overtime hours are for replacement personnel hours. Is it accurate that the contracts require that every vacant shift has to be offered as a potential overtime shift to other officers? Is there a way to change the contract to be more effective at decreasing overtime rather than hiring more officers? So those were questions from Councillor Campbell, Andrea Campbell, District 4, who was with us earlier. All right, and now I will add some of my further questions on, and since we were just doing police, I will switch over to environment. So, you know, I'd like to know if the city's, I think we've got a couple of things. I'm really excited about the $1 million for green jobs. I definitely want to dig in. We've been pushing for a conservation corps type program, and we've been talking to a lot of groups in the city that are doing at a small scale green jobs training now. And so I think the opportunity to create connective tissue there is really great. I do think that one question is just, and it's an echo of Councillor Wu's question, like what's the staffing plan? I think and what's the model that's being contemplated? So we think we should consider a model similar to Philadelphia's Power Corps, which we had at a hearing earlier this spring. And we would love to, and that one of the things we learned from that is that we really need a sort of a first hire who's going to do a lot of coordinating between departments and kind of get something up and running, and then some subsequent hires. And so want to know the staffing plan, want to know how existing community partners that have green jobs training, including those who are part of our Success Link program, will be included in these discussions so we can create a meaningful career pipeline for green jobs. We'd also love to see the Native and Indigenous communities be included in this conversation. They're not always included in our conversations about programming generally in Boston, but there's a real nexus of connection here with the green jobs, and we'd love to make sure that they're part of program design and have access to this type of training and job opportunities. And curious how we're going to be training Boston residents, helping local entrepreneurs be trained to meet the net zero carbon performance standards, other sustainable design standards that the city's putting on the table. So I guess that's my main thing is green jobs training. What are the details and how is it part of this like bigger vision of meeting that demand that we ourselves, the city, are creating? I also want to know if, you know, with that green jobs program, with the ARP money being able to support stormwater infrastructure, do we intend to create a green stormwater infrastructure plan? That's something that New York and Philly both have citywide, which they expect is going to save them money as compared to traditional gray stormwater infrastructure in terms of reduced flood and storm damage in the long term. I know we're taking steps within water and sewer, but sort of curious whether we have a plan, whether we intend to form a plan, and we want to talk about whether the Environment Department is able to work. This is a little bit related to what Councillor Mejia was talking about, but whether the Environment Department can work with public housing and affordable housing communities to prioritize green stormwater infrastructure near those communities where often there's a lot of flood risk. Then on the Renew Boston Trust, I asked about the depth of the retrofits, and I'm expecting an answer from PFD on that. But would love a little bit more thought from environment again about how the depth of our savings in the Renew Boston Trust is sort of part of meeting our overall climate targets. On hiring in the environment department, why are we having difficulty attracting qualified candidates? Sort of like what are the qualifications we're looking for that we can't find? Thinking about more diverse hiring, what are the steps that could be taken? We'd love to know a bit more about the revision of regulations for parking freezes under the Air Pollution Control Commission. Love to hear a bit more about the status of building carbon performance standard development. I know that's very much underway, but we sort of want to know what the latest is. Curious how the Clean Air Community Grant Program is being publicized. Do we expect to receive a lot of applications on that front? Are we thinking about monitoring the success of those in actually reducing air pollution and thinking about scaling some of them up, or just trying to understand if that's like just a sort of one-off, or are we going somewhere with it? Overall question for the environment department is really like where we are on meeting our carbon goals and how we are accelerating to meet those 2030 and 2050. And it's sort of, again, like, does everything we're doing add up to the solutions that we're targeting? So that's a sort of big picture question, but would love to know it. And then with the Green Jobs Program, again, I forgot to say this earlier, but kind of figuring out how to set something up that in the long run could turn into a track at Madison Park, I think would be really great. So would love to hear if they're talking about that at all. It would be great to get a list of the projects that benefited from the green bond offering in the winter. We may have that already, but it would be great to get that. And then landmarks specifically, I definitely want to focus in on. I agree with Councillor Flaherty that landmarks needs to do its work well, to really like preserve history in the context of a growing historical city. We need process changes, which are not a budget problem, but they are something I'm going to be chasing this year. But we also do need more funding. We're like 99 years behind our backlog of petitions. So I saw that Landmarks is adding one district staffer, which I think will help us get some of the new districts up in Roxbury running, which is awesome. It feels to me like we still really need somebody to be processing that petitions backlog in a big way. And then I think we really need to be making a funding plan for a citywide preservation plan, like a survey of our historic resources that will look at every neighborhood, regardless of whether it's got, people who are banging the drum. Because I think we've had really uneven, from an equity perspective, success at historic preservation across the city. And so I really want a citywide plan. I want us to think about how, through a combination of the budget and the CPA, that we're doing that. And I think there's an opportunity with us looking at how to kind of revitalize tourism and create occasions to drive economic development in the city in the next few years as we try to come back at our historical sites. I think the historical sites are an important piece of that. So would love to talk about that, how landmarks and that whole world is in conversation with the tourism world, so that we're really getting the right kind of joined up, enlightened economic development plan that has a space for history, which is so important here in the city of Boston to our economy. And it's important in its own right for, our sense of place and our communities. And then I know we received a grant for archaeology. Would love to understand how that's going to expand our capacity, and hope that we can build that into a kind of permanent thing, because I think Joe does fantastic work, but could definitely use more sort of long-term capacity. And then just really, how we're doing things at landmarks to make sure that we're really having an equity lens on landmarking. And obviously I have a petition before the council, which we're still in the middle of kind of legislative back and forth on, about changing our designation requirement to be local landmarking, and really want to push that through. But as we discussed in those hearings, to do that and do it effectively, we need the staff capacity at landmarks. So I think those are my environment landmarks questions. Besides the questions I've already asked for the police, just skimming to make sure that mine are not redundant with others. Yeah, I mean, underscoring like what fiscal management and oversight is going to occur in FY22 that didn't occur in FY21. Like we didn't get there in FY21. So like, what are we doing that's different in FY22? And some of that's about this formula I talked about, and some of it's about controls. And there has to be a convincing plan for this to be plausible. And then I think I asked already about sort of what's the nature of the cadet training, de-escalation, anti-bias, and kind of the overall recruitment plan. I think to the extent that's a solution, and I think there's, real back and forth about that, making sure that at the front end, we're really training officers in the kind of community engagement and diversion from police response that we want to see is pretty important. So yeah, I think I think those are my questions. And so Shane and Michelle, we will touch base on getting those all formally typed up and over. But I just want to thank my colleagues, both those who came and who sent questions ahead. And we're looking forward to hearings on May 10th. And I'll just say to the public, we'll be having a bunch of these next week. So while you can't testify, if you've got a question you really want your counselor to put on the record, you could write to them about it. And with that, this working session of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee is adjourned. Thanks so much.